I never thought I would end up in court testifying against my own HOA president. But the moment Deborah Vance demanded I hand over my forklift for her personal move, I knew this woman had finally crossed a line she could not come back from. My name is Frank Cooper, and I have lived in Meadowbrook Estates in Scottsdale, Arizona for the past 7 years. I work as a warehouse supervisor for a logistics company, and about 3 years ago, I purchased a used forklift for my side business restoring vintage cars. The machine was perfectly legal, properly insured, and stored in a private climate-controlled storage facility I rented about 2 miles from the neighborhood. I had never brought it into the HOA community, never parked it on any common areas, and honestly, I did not think anyone in the association even knew I owned one. That all changed on a scorching Tuesday afternoon in late June when Deborah showed up at my door unannounced. I was in my garage working on a 1967 Mustang when I heard the doorbell ring 3 times in rapid succession, the kind of aggressive ringing that immediately puts you on edge. I wiped the grease off my hands with a shop towel and walked through the house to answer the door. Deborah stood on my porch wearing her usual uniform of a pressed pantsuit despite the 100-degree heat, her blonde hair styled in that specific way that seemed designed to demand speaking to managers. She held a clipboard against her chest like a shield and had her phone in her other hand, probably ready to document any perceived violation she could find. "Frank, we need to talk," she said without any greeting or preamble. "Hello to you too, Deborah. What can I do for you?" I tried to keep my tone neutral. After years of dealing with her constant complaints about everyone's mailbox angles and lawn stripe directions, I had learned that staying calm was the only way to get through conversations with her. "I heard through the grapevine that you own a forklift," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I need to borrow it this weekend. I am moving some furniture and heavy boxes, and a forklift would make the job much easier." I blinked at her, genuinely confused about how this was even a conversation we were having. "I do own a forklift, but it's not something I loan out. It's specialized equipment, requires certification to operate, and the insurance liability alone would be a nightmare if something went wrong." Her expression hardened instantly. "I am the HOA president, Frank. I do a lot for this community, and I think the least you could do is help me out when I need it. It's just for 1 day, maybe 2 at most. Deborah, it's not about willingness to help. It's about liability and safety. That machine weighs several thousand pounds and can cause serious damage or injury if not operated correctly. Do you even have forklift certification?" She waved her hand dismissively. "How hard can it be? You just push some levers and drive it around. I have seen people do it on YouTube." I actually laughed, though I immediately regretted it when I saw her face turn red. "It's not that simple. There's counterbalance physics, load capacity calculations, and a dozen safety protocols. I can't just hand over a piece of industrial equipment to someone without training. Beyond that, my insurance specifically prohibits unauthorized operators." "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I am not asking for much. Just let me use it for a few hours on Saturday. I will bring it right back." "The answer is no, Deborah. I am sorry, but I cannot do that." I started to close the door, hoping that would end the conversation. She stuck her foot in the doorway. "You know, Frank, I could make things very difficult for you in this neighborhood. I have noticed several potential violations around your property lately. That garage door is looking a bit faded, and I am pretty sure those rose bushes are extending past the approved landscaping boundary." I felt my jaw tighten. This was classic Deborah, threatening people with HOA violations whenever she did not get her way. I had watched her do it to at least a dozen neighbors over the years. Are you seriously threatening me with fake violations because I would not loan you my forklift? They are not fake violations if I say they are violations, she said coldly. As HOA president, I have the authority to interpret our covenant rules, and I interpret them very strictly when residents are not being cooperative community members. Get your foot out of my door, Deborah. This conversation is over. I used my firmest voice, the one I reserved for problem employees at work. She pulled her foot back but pointed her finger at my face. You are making a big mistake, Frank. Nobody says no to me in this neighborhood. Nobody. She turned and marched back to her silver Lexus SUV parked in my driveway, leaving me standing there wondering what fresh hell she was about to unleash on my life. I had dealt with difficult people before, but Deborah had a special talent for making everything into a personal vendetta. That evening, I called my friend Marcus, who lived 3 streets over in the same neighborhood. Marcus had his own history with Deborah after she tried to fine him $500 for painting his front door. A shade of blue she claimed was not on the approved color list, even though he had gotten written approval from the architectural committee before doing the work. She did what? Marcus said when I told him about the forklift demand. Just showed up and demanded I loan her my forklift like it was a lawn mower or something. When I said no, she threatened me with violation notices. Marcus groaned. That woman is absolutely unhinged. You know, she tried to fine the Hendersons last month because their teenage son's car was parked in their driveway for more than 48 hours. She said it violated some obscure rule about inoperable vehicles, even though the kid drives it to school every single day. How is she still president? Has nobody tried to vote her out? People have tried, but she controls the voting process and always manages to stay in power. Plus, she has this core group of retired busybodies who follow her around and back up all her crazy rules. It's like a dictatorship disguised as a homeowners association. We talked for another 20 minutes, and Marcus advised me to document everything and be prepared for retaliation. He was right to warn me, because the very next day, I found a violation notice tucked into my front door. The notice claimed I had 12 different violations, ranging from garage door finish deterioration to unauthorized plant growth beyond property boundaries, to unapproved vehicle maintenance activities visible from street. Each violation carried a $50 fine, totaling $600, due within 30 days. I read through the list with growing anger. Half of these were completely made up, and the other half were so minor and subjective that they would never hold up under any reasonable scrutiny. My garage door was maybe slightly faded from years of sun exposure, but it was not in poor condition. The rose bushes were well within my property line. And the unapproved vehicle maintenance was apparently referring to the fact that I sometimes worked on cars in my garage with the door open, which had never been a problem for the previous 6 years I had lived there. I immediately drafted a formal response letter disputing every single violation and requesting a hearing with the HOA board. According to the CC and Articus, the governing documents for our community, I had the right to contest any violations and present my case before the full board. I hand-delivered my response to Deborah's house that same afternoon. She answered the door in yoga pants and a tank top, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. What do you want, Frank? I am formally disputing these violations and requesting a board hearing, I said, handing her the envelope. These charges are retaliatory and baseless, and I will be bringing photos and documentation to prove it. She took the envelope without looking at it. The board meets in 3 weeks. You will receive notification of the date and time. And Frank, just because you request a hearing does not mean the fines go away. You still owe $600. I am not paying a single cent until after the hearing, which is my right under the CC and Articles. I suggest you actually read the governing documents instead of just making up rules as you go." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Careful, Frank. You are already on thin ice. I would hate for the board to find additional violations that require immediate action." I turned and walked away before I said something I would regret. This woman was absolutely power drunk, and she clearly had no intention of following the actual rules that were supposed to govern the HOA. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated in ways I could not have predicted. Deborah started showing up at my house at random times, taking photos of my property from the sidewalk. She would walk slowly past my driveway, stopping to take pictures of my garage, my landscaping, even my mailbox. When I confronted her about it one morning as I was leaving for work, she claimed she was documenting ongoing violations for the board hearing. "You are harassing me," I told her. "This is beyond anything reasonable." "I am doing my job as HOA president," she replied coolly. "If you do not like it, maybe you should move to a neighborhood without an HOA." My wife, Rachel, who worked from home as a graphic designer, started feeling uncomfortable with Deborah's constant presence around our house. She told me one evening that she had seen Deborah's car parked across the street for over an hour that afternoon, just sitting there with Deborah inside staring at our house. "This is getting creepy," Rachel said. "Can we report her for stalking or something?" I do not know if it technically qualifies as stalking since she is not threatening us directly, but I will look into it. I am also going to set up some security cameras around the property. If she is going to document everything, then I am going to document her documenting everything. I installed 4 high-definition cameras the following weekend, covering all angles of our property including the street in front of our house. The cameras had motion detection and cloud backup, so everything would be saved automatically. I also made sure to put up the required notification signs stating that video surveillance was in use. The HOA board hearing was scheduled for a Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in the community clubhouse. I prepared thoroughly, printing out photos of my property, copies of the relevant CC and R sections, and even comparison photos of other houses in the neighborhood that had similar or worse conditions than the violations I was accused of. Rachel came with me for moral support, and Marcus offered to attend as well since he had his own experiences with Deborah's vindictive behavior. When we arrived at the clubhouse, there were already about a dozen people there. The board consisted of 5 members. Deborah as president, an elderly man named Tom who served as treasurer, a middle-aged woman named Patricia as secretary, and 2 at-large members named Jim and Sandra. Deborah sat at the head of a long table, looking very official with her papers and laptop spread out in front of her. She barely acknowledged my arrival, just gestured for me to sit in the chair facing the board. "Let us call this meeting to order," Deborah said once everyone was seated. "We are here tonight to address the violation dispute filed by Frank Cooper of 4782 Meadowview Lane. Frank, you have been cited for 12 violations of our community covenants. You have requested this hearing to dispute these charges. You have 10 minutes to present your case." I stood up and distributed copies of my evidence packet to each board member. "Thank you for the opportunity to present my case. I believe these violations are retaliatory in nature and do not reflect any actual problems with my property. Let me go through each one." I spent the next 15 minutes, well over the 10 minutes Deborah had allocated, methodically dismantling each violation. For the garage door claim, I showed photos demonstrating that my door was in similar or better condition than at least 8 other houses in the neighborhood. For the landscaping claim, I had actual survey documents showing my rose bushes were 18 inches inside my property line. For the vehicle maintenance claim, I cited the specific CC and R section that allowed homeowners to perform routine maintenance in their garages. Several of the board members looked uncomfortable as I presented my evidence, particularly Patricia and Tom. They kept glancing at Deborah, who sat stone-faced throughout my entire presentation. "Are there any questions from the board?" I asked when I finished. Tom cleared his throat. "Frank, I have to say this evidence is pretty compelling. Deborah, do you have any response to these points?" Deborah shuffled through her papers. "The violations stand as written. As HOA president, I have the authority and responsibility to maintain community standards. Frank's property does not meet those standards, but he just showed us that his property is consistent with dozens of other properties in the neighborhood," Patricia said. "If we fine him for these issues, shouldn't we be fining all those other homeowners too?" "That is not relevant to this hearing," Deborah snapped. "We are here to discuss Frank's violations, not other properties." "Actually, it is completely relevant," I interjected. "Selective enforcement of rules is discriminatory and not allowed under our own governing documents. Either the rules apply to everyone equally, or they do not apply at all." Marcus raised his hand from the audience. "Can I say something? I am not part of the board, but I am a homeowner in this community, and I have witnessed Deborah's pattern of selective enforcement for years. She uses violation notices as weapons against people she has personal grudges against." "You are out of order," Deborah said, her face reddening. "This is not an open forum." "Let him speak," Jim said. He was one of the at-large board members and had been quietly listening the whole time. "I want to hear what he has to say." Marcus stood up. "Deborah filed bogus violations against me last year because I disagreed with her about the pool rules. She fined the Hendersons for having their son's car in the driveway. She threatened the Johnsons with a lawsuit because their Christmas lights stayed up until January 2nd. And now she is going after Frank with 12 made-up violations. I think we all know why." "And why is that?" Tom asked. "Because Frank refused to loan her his forklift, and she told him she would make his life difficult if he did not cooperate," Marcus said. The room went silent. All eyes turned to Deborah, whose face had gone from red to almost purple. "That is a lie," she said, but her voice cracked slightly. "Actually, it's not," I said calmly. "And I have my doorbell camera footage to prove it. Would the board like to see the video of Deborah threatening me with violations after I declined to loan her my forklift?" I pulled out my phone and opened the video file. The board members leaned in as I played the footage, which clearly showed Deborah threatening to interpret the rules strictly against me because I was not being a cooperative community member. Patricia looked horrified. "Deborah, this is completely inappropriate. You cannot threaten residents with violations to coerce them into doing personal favors for you. I need that forklift for legitimate community purposes," Deborah said defensively. "I was moving some old furniture out of the clubhouse storage area." "You specifically said in the video that you were moving your own furniture and boxes," I pointed out. "And even if it was for community purposes, which it clearly was not, you cannot force a resident to loan you their personal property." Tom shook his head. "I have heard enough. I move that all 12 violations against Frank Cooper be dismissed immediately and that any fines already assessed be voided." "I second that motion," Jim said quickly. "All in favor?" Patricia asked. 4 hands went up. Only Deborah abstained, glaring at each board member who voted against her. "The motion passes," Patricia said. "Frank, your violations are dismissed. I apologize on behalf of the board for this situation." I nodded. "Thank you. I appreciate the board taking the time to actually review the evidence. As I gathered my papers, Deborah stood abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. She grabbed her laptop and stormed out of the clubhouse without another word. Rachel squeezed my hand. Well, that went better than expected. For now, I said, but something tells me this is not over. I was proven right much sooner than I anticipated. That Saturday morning, I got a call from Secure Store, the facility where I kept my forklift and various automotive equipment. The manager, a guy named David who I had known for years, sounded stressed. "Frank, you need to get down here right away. Someone broke into your unit." My stomach dropped. "What? When?" "Security noticed it this morning when they were doing rounds. The padlock on your unit is completely destroyed, like someone took bolt cutters to it. The door is partially open. I have not gone inside yet because I wanted you here, but I can see from the doorway that some of your equipment is gone. I will be there in 15 minutes. Have you called the police?" "Not yet. Wanted to talk to you first. I will call them now." I drove to the storage facility faster than I probably should have, my mind racing through possibilities. The timing was too coincidental. Just days after the board hearing where Deborah was publicly humiliated, my storage unit gets broken into. There was no way this was not connected. When I arrived, there were already 2 Scottsdale police officers on site along with David. My unit door was rolled halfway up, and I could immediately see that my forklift was gone. The unit was large enough to drive a vehicle into, and there were tire tracks leading from inside the unit out to the facility's main drive. "Mr. Cooper," one of the officers, whose name tag Reed Martinez, approached me. "This is your unit." "Yes, sir." "I rent it for storing automotive equipment and project vehicles. I had a forklift in here along with various tools and parts." "Can you tell what is missing?" I walked inside, trying not to disturb anything. The forklift was definitely gone, which was the most valuable item. Some smaller tools and equipment were still there, but whoever took the forklift clearly knew what they were looking for. My forklift is missing. It is a Toyota 8 FGU25 model, orange and white, serial number FG 48294. It is worth about $18,000. Some hand tools are gone too, but the forklift is the major loss. Officer Martinez took notes. "Any idea who might have done this? Any enemies? Anyone who knew you had this equipment here?" I hesitated. I knew exactly who I suspected, but making an accusation without proof would not help anything. "I might have an idea, but I want to see what the security footage shows first." "David, do you have cameras covering this area?" David nodded. "Yeah, we have cameras at all the entrances and several throughout the facility. Let me pull up the footage from last night." We went to the facility office where David accessed the security system. He fast-forwarded through the previous evening until something appeared on screen around 2:30 in the morning. A silver Lexus SUV pulled up to the entrance gate, and someone entered a code to open it. "Can you zoom in on the license plate?" Officer Martinez asked. David zoomed in, and I felt my suspicions confirmed. That was definitely Deborah's vehicle. I had seen that Lexus parked in front of my house enough times to recognize it. "I know that car," I said. "It belongs to Deborah Vance. She is the president of my HOA, and we have been having some disputes lately." The officers exchanged glances. "What kind of disputes?" the other officer, Thompson, asked. I explained the whole situation, from Deborah demanding to borrow the forklift to the retaliatory violations to the board hearing where she was essentially called out for abuse of power. Both officers listened carefully, taking notes. "So she knew you had the forklift and knew where you stored it?" Martinez asked. "She knew I owned a forklift, but I never told her where I kept it. She must have followed me here at some point or somehow found out. We continued watching the footage. The Lexus drove directly to my unit without hesitation, suggesting Deborah knew exactly where she was going. She got out of the car carrying what looked like large bolt cutters. Over the next few minutes, the footage showed her attacking the padlock on my unit. It took her a while, but she eventually broke through. Then she rolled up the door, got back in her car, and drove away. About 20 minutes later, the SUV returned, but this time it was towing something. The video quality made it hard to see details, but the shape was consistent with my forklift. Deborah must have gone home or to another location to get a trailer, then came back to actually take the forklift. "Well, that is pretty clear evidence," Thompson said. "We have her on camera breaking and entering, destruction of property, and grand theft. Can you run that plate to confirm the registration?" David provided a clearer screenshot of the license plate, and Martinez called it in. A few minutes later, confirmation came back that the vehicle was registered to Deborah Lynn Vance at an address in Meadowbrook Estates. "Mr. Cooper, we are going to need you to come down to the station to file a formal report and get copies of this footage," Martinez said. "Then we will be paying Miss Vance a visit to recover your property and place her under arrest." The next few hours were a blur of paperwork and statements. I provided the officers with everything I had: the doorbell camera footage of Deborah threatening me, documentation of the HOA violations, records of her harassment, and of course the security footage from the storage facility. By early afternoon, the police were ready to confront Deborah. "Would you like to come with us when we serve the warrant?" Martinez asked. "We have confirmed the forklift is at her property, at least according to some neighbors we spoke with who saw her unloading something large from a trailer this morning." I absolutely wanted to be there, though I knew I would need to stay back and let the police handle it. Rachel decided to come too, saying she would not miss this for anything. We followed the police cars to Deborah's house, which was in a slightly upscale section of our neighborhood. Her property had immaculate landscaping, a 3-car garage, and elaborate decorative features that she had ironically approved for herself while denying similar requests from other homeowners. The police knocked on her door, and after a minute, Deborah answered. I could not hear what was being said from where we were parked down the street, but I could see her face go through several emotions: confusion, anger, indignation, and then fear as she apparently realized how serious the situation was. Martinez showed her something, probably the warrant, and Deborah shook her head vigorously. She pointed at the officers, then at her house, gesturing wildly. She was clearly trying to argue her way out of trouble, but the officers were not having it. More police vehicles arrived, including a supervisor. They spent about 20 minutes talking to Deborah at her doorway before she finally, reluctantly, led them around to her backyard. Rachel and I got out of my truck and walked closer, staying on the public sidewalk where we were legally allowed to be. In Deborah's backyard, partially covered with a tarp, was my forklift. She had attempted to hide it, but the distinctive orange and white paint was visible, and I could see the serial number from where I stood. "That is definitely mine," I called out to Martinez. "Serial number matches." Deborah's head snapped around when she heard my voice. Her expression was pure rage. "You did this. You set me up. That forklift was abandoned at the storage facility. I was just taking possession of unwanted equipment." "Madam, we have you on camera breaking the lock on Mr. Cooper's storage unit at 2:30 this morning," Thompson said firmly. "The footage clearly shows premeditated theft. You need to stop talking and listen carefully. You are under arrest for burglary, grand theft, and criminal damage. This is insane. I am the HOA president. I have rights. You cannot just arrest me for trying to help the community." How exactly does stealing my personal property help the community? I could not stop myself from asking. I needed it to move furniture from the clubhouse. It was an emergency. You refused to help when the community needed you, so I had to take matters into my own hands. Martinez pulled out handcuffs. Madam, turn around and put your hands behind your back. No, I am not some criminal. This is a misunderstanding. Deborah's voice was getting shrill now, drawing the attention of neighbors who started coming out of their houses to see what was happening. Madam, you can either cooperate or we will add resisting arrest to the charges. Your choice. Deborah looked around wildly, perhaps hoping someone would come to her defense, but all the gathering neighbors just watched silently. Some of them looked satisfied, probably the ones who had been on the receiving end of her tyrannical HOA leadership over the years. Finally, Deborah turned around and let Martinez cuff her. As he read her Miranda rights, she started crying, her carefully maintained composure completely falling apart. This is not fair. I do so much for this community. Nobody appreciates anything I do. I just needed the forklift for one day. Thompson contacted a towing company to come transport my forklift back to the storage facility, while Martinez loaded Deborah into his patrol car. I stood there watching, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. This whole situation could have been avoided if Deborah had just accepted my initial no and moved on with her life. Rachel put her arm around my waist. Well, I guess that is that. I guess so, I said. Though knowing Deborah, this probably is not quite over yet. The arrest made local news that evening. The story of an HOA president arrested for stealing a forklift was apparently interesting enough for the local stations to send reporters. I declined to be interviewed, but several of my neighbors were more than happy to talk about Deborah's reign of terror over the neighborhood. Over the next week, I learned more about what would happen with the criminal case. The prosecutor's office contacted me to go over my testimony and evidence. They told me that Deborah had been released on bond the day after her arrest, but was facing serious charges. Burglary in the first degree, because she broke into the storage unit. Theft of means of transportation, because the forklift was self-propelled, and criminal damage for destroying the padlock. Given the value of the forklift and the clear evidence of premeditation, these are all felonies, the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Mills, explained to me. The security footage is about as clear-cut as evidence gets. Her attorney will probably try to negotiate a plea deal, but we are not inclined to be generous given the circumstances. What kind of sentence are we looking at if she is convicted? I asked. For first-degree burglary alone, the sentencing range in Arizona is 4 to 12.5 years. The theft charge adds another 2 to 8.75 years. We would probably recommend concurrent sentences, but she is looking at serious prison time unless she takes a plea. The reality of that hit me hard. I had wanted Deborah to face consequences for her actions, but the thought of her actually going to prison for years was sobering. Does she understand how serious this is? I asked. Jennifer nodded. Her attorney has certainly explained it. We have received preliminary overtures about a plea agreement. They want to plead down to lesser charges, maybe get probation and restitution instead of prison time. What would you think about that? I thought about it carefully. I want my costs covered, including the damages to my storage unit lock and the expense of dealing with all of this. I want a formal apology. I want her permanently removed from any HOA leadership position. And I want her to get some kind of counseling because her behavior goes beyond just bad judgment. But I do not necessarily need to see her go to prison for years if she is willing to take real responsibility. That is very reasonable, Jennifer said. I will communicate your position to her attorney, but ultimately, the decision about accepting a plea is up to Miss Vance. Meanwhile, the HOA was in chaos. With Deborah arrested and unable to serve as president, the board held an emergency meeting to appoint an interim president. Patricia, the secretary, took over temporarily. One of her first acts was to conduct a comprehensive review of all violation notices Deborah had issued over the past 2 years. Patricia called me about a week after Deborah's arrest. "Frank, I need to apologize to you on behalf of the entire board. We have been going through records, and it is clear that Deborah was abusing her authority systematically. She issued over 200 violation notices in the past year alone, which is triple the historical average. Most of them were petty and retaliatory." "I appreciate you looking into it," I said. "A lot of people in this neighborhood have been suffering under her leadership. We are going to be sending out letters to everyone who received violations in the past year, offering them the chance to dispute those violations with a fresh review. We are also going to be implementing new oversight procedures so that no single board member has unchecked power again, and we are holding special elections for a new president next month." "That sounds like a good start," I said. "This neighborhood could use some actual reasonable leadership." The plea negotiations took about 6 weeks. During that time, I had my forklift returned to the storage facility with a much better lock and upgraded security. The facility also improved their camera systems and added additional patrols after the break-in. Deborah's attorney reached out to me directly to discuss the situation, which I agreed to after consulting with Jennifer Mills. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Scottsdale. Deborah's lawyer was a middle-aged man named Richard Stern who looked tired. "Mr. Cooper, thank you for meeting with me," he started. "I want to be direct with you. My client made some very poor decisions that she deeply regrets. She is facing the potential of years in prison, loss of her professional reputation, and financial ruin. The prosecutor has indicated you might be open to a resolution that does not involve maximum sentencing. That depends entirely on whether your client is actually taking responsibility or just trying to minimize consequences," I said. "I have seen no evidence that Deborah thinks she did anything wrong." Richard sighed. "That has been a challenge. Deborah has difficulty accepting that her actions were criminal rather than just poor judgment, but she is beginning to understand the severity of the situation. Would you be willing to hear a personal apology from her?" I was not sure I wanted to see Deborah again, but something about Richard's tone made me think this might be genuine. "I will consider it, but I want some conditions in place. Any meeting happens in a neutral location with witnesses present. She does not get to argue or justify her actions. It needs to be a real apology, not a justification." "Agreed. Let me talk to her and see if we can arrange something." 3 days later, I found myself back at the same coffee shop, this time with Rachel, Jennifer Mills, and Richard Stern present. Deborah arrived looking very different from the put-together HOA president I had dealt with for years. She wore minimal makeup, casual clothes, and her hair was not styled. She looked like she had aged a decade in the past 2 months. She sat down across from me, her hands shaking slightly. For a long moment, she just stared at the table. "Frank, I owe you an apology," she finally said, her voice quiet. "What I did was wrong. It was criminal. I broke into your storage unit and stole your property because I was angry that you would not do what I wanted. I have spent my whole life being in control, being the person who makes the decisions, and when you said no to me, I could not handle it." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I convinced myself that I was entitled to use your forklift because I did so much for the community, because I worked so hard as HOA president. But the truth is, I was just used to getting my way, and I could not accept someone setting a boundary with me. I destroyed your property, stole something extremely valuable, and put myself in a position where I might go to prison for years. And I deserve whatever consequences come from that. I watched her carefully, trying to assess if this was genuine or just an act for the prosecutor's benefit. But the tears that started falling seemed real, as did the tremor in her voice. The worst part is that I hurt not just you, but the entire community, she continued. I became exactly the kind of person I always hated, someone who abused their power to feel important. I made people's lives miserable with petty violations and rules. I turned our neighborhood into a place where people were afraid instead of feeling at home, and I am truly, deeply sorry for all of it. The coffee shop was silent except for the quiet sounds of other patrons. Rachel reached over and squeezed my hand. I accept your apology, I said finally. But accepting an apology does not mean there are not consequences. You committed serious crimes. You need help, probably therapy, to understand why you felt so entitled to control everyone around you. And you need to make things right, not just with me but with everyone you hurt. Deborah nodded, wiping her eyes. I know. I have already started seeing a therapist, and I have written apology letters to 37 different families in the neighborhood that I treated poorly. I do not expect forgiveness from any of them, but they deserved an acknowledgement of what I did. Jennifer Mills spoke up. Miss Vance, my office has prepared a plea agreement that we are willing to offer. You would plead guilty to 1 count of burglary in the 3rd degree and 1 count of theft. You would receive 5 years of supervised probation with the first year served on home detention. You would pay full restitution to Mr. Cooper for all damages and costs, complete 200 hours of community service, and continue mental health counseling. You would also be permanently barred from serving in any HOA leadership position. Any violation of probation would result in activation of a suspended prison sentence of 3 years. Does that sound acceptable to you and your attorney? Richard looked at Deborah, who nodded slowly. Yes, we will accept those terms. Mr. Cooper, are you satisfied with this resolution? Jennifer asked me. I thought about it. Prison time would not actually benefit anyone in this situation. Deborah needed help and accountability, not just punishment. Yes, I am satisfied. But I want to be clear that if she violates any terms of that probation, I will advocate for the full prison sentence. Understood, Jennifer said. We will proceed with the plea agreement. The actual plea hearing happened 2 weeks later at the Maricopa County Superior Court. I attended with Rachel, along with several neighbors who wanted to see justice served. Deborah stood before Judge Catherine Reeves and formally pleaded guilty to the charges. The judge accepted the plea agreement but added some stern warnings. Miss Vance, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust egregiously, Judge Reeves said. The only reason you are not going to prison today is because Mr. Cooper has shown you more mercy than you probably deserve. You will comply with every single term of your probation. You will pay full restitution. You will complete your community service. And you will never hold a position of power over others again without serious self-reflection and growth. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Deborah said quietly. I am also ordering that you write a formal statement detailing your abuse of power as HOA president, which will be provided to the Homeowners Association so they can implement reforms to prevent this from happening again. You will cooperate fully with any investigations into your conduct. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor. The judge signed the paperwork, and just like that, the criminal case was resolved. Deborah would avoid prison but would spend the next 5 years proving she could be a responsible member of society. Outside the courthouse, several of my neighbors approached me. Marcus was there, along with the Hendersons, the Johnsons, and about a dozen others who had suffered under Deborah's HOA tyranny. "Thank you for pushing for consequences," Mrs. Henderson said. "My son was humiliated when she made us get rid of his car, claiming it was inoperable when he drove it every single day. We felt so powerless." "Nobody should have that much unchecked power," I said. "Hopefully, the new HOA leadership will be better." The special election for HOA president happened the following month. Patricia decided not to run, saying she was happy to stay on as secretary but did not want the stress of being president. Instead, a retired engineer named David Martinez threw his hat in the ring with a platform of transparency, fairness, and actually following the CC and Articus as written rather than making up rules. David won in a landslide, and one of his first acts was to implement a new system of checks and balances. No single board member could issue a violation notice without approval from at least 2 other board members. All violation notices had to cite specific CC and R sections. Homeowners got a streamlined dispute process with automatic hearings within 2 weeks. And board meetings became truly open forums where residents could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. The neighborhood began to feel different almost immediately. People were friendlier, more relaxed. There were fewer whispered conversations about HOA violations and more actual community events. The pool area, which had been governed by strict rules under Deborah, became a place where families could actually enjoy themselves without worrying about being reported for minor infractions. Deborah, meanwhile, was confined to her home for the first year of her probation. I occasionally saw her during my drives through the neighborhood, always inside her house or in her backyard. She sold her Lexus SUV, probably to help pay the restitution she owed me, which totaled just over $23,000 when all costs were calculated. She paid it in full within 6 months, apparently using savings and liquidating some investments. About 8 months after the plea agreement, I received a letter from Deborah in the mail. I almost did not open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten, several pages long. In it, Deborah explained how therapy had helped her understand the psychological issues that led to her controlling behavior. She wrote about growing up in a chaotic household where she felt powerless, and how she had overcompensated in adulthood by seeking positions where she could exert control over others. She acknowledged that being HOA president had fed her worst impulses rather than challenging her to be a better person. She also wrote about the community service she was doing, working with a nonprofit that helped low-income families with home repairs. She said the experience of actually helping people without any power or authority over them had been humbling and educational. She ended the letter by saying she did not expect a response, but wanted me to know that my decision to show her mercy instead of pushing for maximum punishment had given her a chance to become a better person. I showed the letter to Rachel, who read it carefully. "Do you believe her?" she asked. "I think I do," I said. "People can change if they want to. Whether Deborah actually does change long-term remains to be seen, but she seems to be trying." "Are you going to write back?" I thought about it. "No, I do not think so. I am glad she is working on herself, but I do not need to be part of that process. Some boundaries are healthy." Rachel nodded. "That makes sense." Life gradually returned to normal. I continued working on my vintage car restoration projects, using my forklift whenever I needed to move engines or heavy parts. The storage facility never had another break-in, especially after they upgraded their security systems. Work at the logistics company was steady, and Rachel's graphic design business was thriving. The HOA drama faded into neighborhood legend, the story of the president who stole a forklift becoming an amusing anecdote that new residents heard when they moved in. David Martinez proved to be an excellent president, and the board functioned smoothly under his leadership. Property values in Meadowbrook Estates actually increased, possibly because the neighborhood was now known for reasonable governance rather than HOA horror stories. About 18 months after Deborah's arrest, I ran into her at a local grocery store. She was wearing a medical uniform, apparently having gotten a job at a nearby clinic. We made eye contact briefly, and she gave me a small, awkward nod before quickly walking away. I appreciated that she did not try to force a conversation. Some relationships, or in our case the lack of relationship, are better left alone. Marcus and I remained good friends, often joking about the forklift incident over beers in my garage while I worked on cars. He had his own run-in with the new HOA board when he wanted to install solar panels, but unlike under Deborah's reign, the process was straightforward and fair. The architectural committee actually encouraged sustainable home improvements as long as they were done properly. "Can you believe how different things are now?" Marcus said one evening as I was putting the finishing touches on the Mustang restoration. "Remember when we were all walking on eggshells, afraid to park in our own driveways or plant a bush without written approval? It was ridiculous," I agreed. But I think Deborah was an extreme case. Most HOAs are probably somewhere in the middle, not great, but not criminal. True, but it shows how important leadership is. One person really can poison an entire community if given unchecked power. The Mustang restoration sold for $42,000 to a collector in California, making it one of my most profitable projects. I used some of the money to upgrade my workshop equipment and put the rest into savings. Life was good, peaceful, and free from HOA drama. Deborah completed her year of home detention and moved to the next phase of her probation, which allowed her more freedom. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was doing well in her medical office job and had kept up with her therapy. She never returned to any kind of community leadership role, which was probably for the best. The criminal charges remained on her record, a permanent reminder of what happens when someone lets power go to their head. The story became a cautionary tale not just in our neighborhood, but in HOA communities across Scottsdale and beyond. Several HOAs contacted David Martinez to learn about the reforms we had implemented, hoping to prevent their own communities from having similar problems. I even gave a talk at a local HOA conference about the importance of transparency and accountability in community governance. It was strange standing in front of a room full of HOA board members, telling the story of how their peer had committed felonies over a forklift, but people needed to hear it. The warning signs were there long before Deborah broke into my storage unit: the petty violations, the selective enforcement, the vindictive behavior. If board members recognized those signs early, they could intervene before things escalated. Rachel surprised me on our anniversary by revealing that she had been documenting the entire ordeal in a blog, which had gained a significant following. She had changed names and some details to protect privacy, but the core story was there. HOA president demands forklift, gets arrested for theft. The blog became so popular that a podcast about HOA horror stories contacted her for an interview. "Did you really write about all of this?" I asked, reading through her blog posts. "I started writing it as therapy, just to process everything that was happening," she said. Then I realized other people were going through similar situations with their HOAs. The response has been incredible. I have gotten hundreds of messages from people sharing their own stories. "I am not sure how I feel about being a character in a popular blog," I said. though I was not actually upset. "You are the hero who stood up to the tyrannical HOA president and ultimately showed her mercy despite what she did," Rachel said with a grin. "There are worse ways to be portrayed." Time continued to pass, as it always does. The forklift incident became part of the neighborhood's history, something that happened but was no longer the defining feature of our community. New families moved in, unaware of the drama that had preceded their arrival. They knew Meadowbrook Estates as a friendly neighborhood with a reasonable HOA, which was exactly what it should have been all along. I completed several more car restoration projects, each one teaching me something new about the craft. The forklift proved invaluable for the work, and I never once regretted refusing to loan it out, even knowing the chaos that refusal had triggered. Some boundaries are worth maintaining, even when maintaining them costs you something. Marcus eventually became a board member himself, bringing his experience and perspective to the governance of the community. He was fair-minded and reasonable, exactly the kind of leader the neighborhood needed. Under his and David's guidance, the HOA became something actually valuable, a group that maintained common areas, organized social events, and helped neighbors resolve disputes without heavy-handed enforcement of petty rules. 3 years after the initial incident, I received official notice that Deborah had successfully completed her probation. She had paid all restitution, finished her community service hours, and complied with every term of her probation agreement. The suspended prison sentence was discharged, meaning she would never have to serve that time as long as she stayed out of trouble. I felt genuinely happy for her. She had made terrible choices, faced real consequences, and apparently used those consequences as an opportunity for growth. That was the best possible outcome in a situation that could have destroyed her life entirely. The neighborhood threw a 5th anniversary party for David's tenure as HOA president, which doubled as a celebration of how far the community had come. The event was held at the clubhouse, the same building where I had presented my case against those bogus violations years earlier. The atmosphere could not have been more different. Instead of tension and hostility, there was laughter and genuine community spirit. Several neighbors approached me during the party to thank me for standing up to Deborah when others were too afraid. I tried to deflect the praise, but Marcus would not let me. Frank refused to back down when it would have been easier to just give in, Marcus announced to the crowd at one point. He stood up for what was right, even when it cost him time, money, and peace of mind, and when he had the chance for revenge, he chose mercy instead. That is the kind of neighbor and community member we should all aspire to be. Everyone applauded, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I had not done anything special, just refused to be bullied and then made reasonable choices when given the opportunity. But I appreciated the recognition. Rachel leaned over and whispered, "You are a good man, Frank Cooper." "I just wanted my forklift back," I whispered back, making her laugh. The party continued late into the evening, with neighbors sharing stories and making plans for future community events. Children played in the pool area without hovering parents worried about violation notices. The grills were fired up for a massive cookout. Someone brought a karaoke machine, leading to some truly terrible but enthusiastic singing. This was what a neighborhood should be, a place where people felt safe, welcomed, and free to be themselves within reasonable boundaries. It had taken a crisis to get here, but we had arrived at something genuinely good. As the party wound down and Rachel and I walked home under the Arizona stars, I reflected on everything that had happened. A simple refusal to loan out my forklift had spiraled into arrests, court cases, and community upheaval. But it had also led to necessary reforms, the removal of a tyrant, and ultimately a better neighborhood for everyone. You ever regret not just loaning her the forklift? Rachel asked as we walked. Not even for a second, I said. Even knowing everything that happened, I would make the same choice. Some people need to hear no, especially people who are used to always getting their way. Do you think Deborah learned that lesson? I hope so. For her sake, and for anyone she has power over in the future. We reached our house, the one we had fought to keep free from bogus HOA violations, and I felt a deep sense of contentment. The garage door was still slightly faded, the rose bushes still extended right up to my property line, and occasionally I still worked on cars with the garage door open. None of those things had ever been real problems, and now everyone knew it. The forklift sat safely in my storage unit, waiting for the next restoration project. It had become famous in a way, the forklift that triggered an HOA president's downfall. But to me, it was just a tool, a piece of equipment that helped me pursue my passion. Life in Meadowbrook Estates continued peacefully. The HOA functioned properly, neighbors treated each other with respect, and the community thrived. Deborah Vance had left an unexpected legacy not of fear and control, but of the importance of accountability and the danger of unchecked power. And somewhere in Scottsdale, hopefully, she had learned those lessons herself and was building a better life based on healthier principles. I genuinely hoped that was true. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption if they are willing to do the work. As for me, I had my wife, my house, my cars, and my forklift. I had good neighbors, a fair HOA, and hard-won peace. The story of the forklift theft would be told for years to come, a reminder that standing up for yourself matters, that consequences are real, and that sometimes mercy is stronger than punishment. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything I needed.